Hi, I'm Ainsley and I'm here to talk to you about Martin Luther, the Reformation, and the formation of Protestantism in Europe. When you hear the name Martin Luther, you probably think of Martin Luther King Jr., a very famous man who did a lot of good in America, but he lived hundreds of years after Martin Luther did. A funny story about Martin Luther King is that his name was originally Michael King after his father. But when he was 5, his father changed both his and Michael King Jr.'s name to Martin Luther King after the man who changed religion and Europe and the United States. Okay, so I need you to pretend that we're back in the 16th century. Go on, pretend. I don't feel like you're pretending. Fine, I'll do it for you. This is better. Alright, so here in the 1500s, the Catholic Church isn't really just a place to go to pray on Sundays. It's a political machine. And it isn't even really called the Catholic Church, it's just called the Church. The Pope, who's one of the head of the Church as a whole, they have a lot more control than just spiritual. It's also political. They can help wage wars and even push the allies to different sides. Here, if you're not part of the Catholic Church, you're going to hell. There have been people that have tried to reform the Catholic Church before Martin Luther in the 1500s. For example, in the 1400s, Hus tried to lead an area ruled by Czechs to reform against the Catholic Church. At one point, there was 90% of the area that was not Catholic. This was an insane amount, and for it, Hus got burned at the stake for heresy. At the same time in history, another reformer, Wycliffe, was defrocked and his teachings were banned by the Catholic Church because it didn't agree with what the Church said. This was pretty interesting, but the most interesting part was later the Church decided they were still upset, dug up his corpse, and proceeded to burn it at the stake for punishment. They started to realize what a risk it was to stand up against the Catholic Church. I've done a lot of research to see exactly how many people were killed for heresy by the Catholic Church. There's so many conflicting opinions, it's really hard to get an exact number. But what I can tell you is in the 1600s in Bohemia, there were 4 million people as a population. After the Church declared that anyone convicted of heresy be killed, there were only 780,000 left. This is a huge number to be taken down by just one power. Someone wrote that there were corpses so thick that there was no one even left to bury them. So, in 1517, a Catholic monk and a professor of theology posted his 95 thesis on the castle church door. These were the 95 problems that Martin Luther had with the Catholic Church. This turned into the Reformation. Now you may be thinking, why did Martin Luther succeed but none of the others did? Well, it's mostly just timing. The Catholic Church had not allowed the common people of the era to have access to the Bible. This was mainly because Bibles were kept strictly in Latin, which only a few priests, scholars, and occasionally monks were able to understand. This all changed when the printing press was invented. Traditionally, the books had all been written by hand, generally by monks, but now the printing press allowed it to be changed into other native tongues of the area and made them more common so they could be distributed for everyone to read. At this time, the Catholic Church was very desperate for money, and they started selling a thing called indulgences. This was basically a get-out-of-jail-free card. What it did was it reduced the time, or all of the time, you had to spend in purgatory before you reached heaven. You could buy them for yourself or for your loved ones that had already died. You got these indulgences by doing a good works. In this case, it was giving money to the church. This kind of made some people very unhappy because yes, sending money to the church is good works, but with a direct exchange of money for salvation made people really uneasy. Another reason that Martin Luther was able to succeed in the Reformation that he started was because he was able to stay alive. The Catholic Church tended not to keep people around that were problems, but Martin Luther was special because he had lots of allies. Now at this time, there was a lot of jockeying for power going around. There was the king of each of the separate countries that were around, the Holy Roman Emperor, at this time it was Charles V, and the Pope. Now Charles V were allies with Germany, which is where Martin Luther came from. He had reason to keep Martin Luther alive, because if the Pope was worried about the heretics, then he gained more power. Oh goodness, we shouldn't forget about England. Oh, they got thrown into this whole mess when the Pope refused to grant King Henry VIII an annulment. This was kind of a divorce in today's standards, but this actually was a very huge mistake for them because King Henry VIII went on to be the head of the Church of England and took on similar ideas as the Catholic Church in the way that he basically killed anyone that didn't agree with him, which were many followers of the Catholic Church. So, with all the killing and the fighting going on and all the bickering over whose beliefs were correct, a lot of religious groups decided that Europe really just wasn't a safe place for them anymore. Luckily, the Americas were starting to be settled around this time, so a lot of them packed up and moved to America, where they found a welcoming spot for lots of religious freedom and new adventures in life.